Lately, I've been thinking a lot about parking lots and when it's socially acceptable to use them to practice driving and riding, and to what degree is it ethical to practice. Where do we draw the moral line for when it is and it isn't okay to use someone's private property without their expressed permission? So when I was first learning to drive, my parents, they sent me to driving school because if you pass the driving school's course, you have slightly better insurance rates and things like that. If I recall correctly, sort of my first day was the guy came to my parents' house and picked me up, and he took me to like a small, quiet residential neighborhood, and we switched places, and I took the driver's seat. I believe I started just doing things like driving very slowly around the neighborhood and really just getting a feel for in this particular vehicle, like the different inputs and how much power to apply and how to use the steering wheel and things like your hand position and where you should be looking, like all the very basic first time stuff. And then we slowly over the following days moved to going on slightly faster roads, and eventually more higher traffic areas and dealing with stop and go traffic and merging and all of that stuff, and eventually doing a little bit of stuff on the highway. But here's the thing that I find interesting is that when it came time to practice slow speed stuff, particularly parallel parking, he took me to the local Sears parking lot and found an empty part of the parking lot, and he set out cones. Even though the mall was private property, he didn't ask for permission, and the mall, like the security that was patrolling through the parking lot, they didn't care at all that we were using the parking lot to practice parallel parking. Lately, I've had a similar experience where I've been practicing slow speed maneuvers, like figure eights and offset weave and circle of trust and things like that in a local college parking lot on the weekends during the summer when the parking lot was completely empty. This particular university, on the weekends, they actually lift up the gates, and there is no enforcement of the lot. And I've had on multiple occasions both university security and local police who like to sit in the parking lot and add that into their rounds, in both the middle of the night and during the middle of the day, have never approached me or bothered me at all, because it was very clear, I've got cones set up that I'm simply doing practicing. The thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is at what point, from an outside perspective, like a property owner or law enforcement or private security, at what point does practicing become something that's not acceptable? So we've established that some practicing behaviors are okay, like parallel parking in a car or a figure eight or U-turn practice in a motorcycle. So there's a threshold that at some point is crossed where the practicing is no longer socially acceptable. And it seems to me that threshold is very subjective. Even for slow speed stuff, there can be a little bit of wiggle room in when something is okay and when it isn't. I was practicing on a weekend in a local, like a warehouse parking lot, that there were no employees in the parking lot, and it was completely empty. And as far as I could tell, there was no posted signs saying that you couldn't go in the parking lot. But I did actually have, on one particular occasion, I had a security guard who that company hired to patrol their premises actually drove up to me and was basically like, I told him I'm only doing like low speed stuff and I'm just practicing, and he understood that, but ultimately he said he said I had to leave because what he said was that it was a secured area. Really, I think that it was mostly he is on the job, and I think that it was kind of a CYB, cover your butt type of thing, where he didn't want to lose his job or get in trouble if something did happen. So he was basically subjectively erring on the side of caution and and telling me that I needed to leave, but maybe a different security guard wouldn't have cared. So even for benign types of practice, there's subjectivity, right? Well, so let's say that you want to practice emergency maneuvers, either on a car or a motorcycle. But let's stay with the example of a motorcycle. So you want to practice emergency braking at speed. Okay, so that means you have a limited parking lot to work with. You speed up to maybe 40 or 50 kilometers an hour. So let's say for this example that you grab a bit too much front brake when you're trying to do an emergency stop, and you end up doing an endo, a front wheelie, and at that exact moment, a security guard comes into the parking lot and sees you do this emergency stop. From this person's standpoint, all they saw was that, oh, this is a person who's stunting. They're in our parking lot and they're stunting. They're deliberately doing endos or front wheelies. They're up to no good. They're doing hooligan type stuff. But in reality, you're just practicing and you've just kind of applied too much front brake, and they tell you have to leave. All right, let's use another example. You're practicing Gymkhana. Gymkhana is a sport where you have to navigate through an obstacle course that involves like U-turns and very tight corners at relatively slow speeds, where you generally don't really get out of first or second gear, but it involves doing these maneuvers relatively quickly. So really, you're not going very fast, but it is an aggressive type of riding, such that from an outside perspective, they might see it as aggressive riding or stunting or things that they wouldn't find to be appropriate use for their parking lot. Let's say you have a figure 8 set up, and you start out and you're practicing it really slowly, and the security guards and the local police, they see you doing it and they don't care. But you keep on doing it, and you slowly get better at it, and you can slowly start doing it faster and faster, such that in a few weeks, when they see you doing it again, you're doing it much faster, significantly faster, at significant lean angles. So now all of a sudden they come over and tell you have to leave. Well, your speed really hasn't changed that much. It's really just your riding position and how you handle the motorcycle has changed. But you're still limited based on the physics of the course to be operating at relatively low speeds. Really, the point that I'm trying to address here is when do you have to ask permission from a property owner to use their parking lot? legally and socially, I think that generally it seems like it's acceptable to use it for, things like parking and practice stuff. But really, should you ask permission under all use cases outside of the sort of expected behaviors that you would do in a parking lot, like parking and driving to a particular store, and getting out and getting groceries and things like that? There are justifiable reasons to want to practice more aggressive driving and riding, simply from a safety standpoint. It's not unreasonable to want to learn how to operate your vehicle at the extremes. So like in a car in the middle of the winter, if you hit a patch of black ice, do you know how to counter steer your car to control loss of traction? And really, the average person doesn't get a whole lot of opportunities to practice things like that. One way that this stuff is kind of already handled is to learn more extreme driving stuff at high performance places like racetracks, which will often offer courses for, like say drifting courses or quartering or any other type of more extreme stuff. And there's even schools that will teach slow speed motorcycle safety that's more extreme than what you would learn in the beginner courses. I've seen some that are hosted and run by motorcycle officers who create these courses for the public to pay, at a price, to pay them for a weekend course or 8-hour course or something like that, to learn how to handle their motorcycle at low speeds in a parking lot that is essentially sanctioned. They have an arrangement as an organization with the owner of that parking lot to use it for this purpose, and they've taken care of insurance and whatever costs that they both mutually agreed upon to charge for renting that parking lot during that time. But I don't think that it really satisfies a need that's out there. In particular, there are a lot of young kids who want to practice stunting, and they don't have a whole lot of money. They bought their bike used. They're young. They don't have a lot of capital, and they don't have, they don't really make a whole lot of money. They may be a college student. They're relatively poor, but they have a bike, and they have, they're young, and they have a lot of energy, and want to learn how to wheelie and practice stunting and all that type of stuff. But they don't have, several $100s to pay for a course to do this stuff. So instead, they find empty parking lots on the weekends or at nighttime, and they use the parking lot. So, for example, in the town that I live in, there are courses like I'm talking about that are available, but there aren't really good places to practice that are public areas. So people who want to practice stunting, they essentially find quiet areas that are usually local businesses or manufacturing or churches that are quiet and there's not really anyone there, and they use that parking lot to do wheelies and and other types of stunting. without asking permission at all. And oftentimes, I know of a couple different lots that I've seen used that actually do have no trespassing signs on them, which means that these people are knowingly violating the rights of that property owner. Now, that really opens up another question about, well, let's say that there isn't a no trespassing sign. So for this I'll use another example from my town. There was a hardware store. There's a chain of hardware stores in Canada called Rona, and this particular Rona went out of business several years ago, and they have this giant parking lot. The problem is that there's a housing development that's sort of like right behind it, not too far away. And for a long time, kids and locals were using this empty parking lot to do, like, racing in their cars, or stunting, drag racing, or all kinds of stuff like that. Donuts in this parking lot. And there was no signage. The Rona didn't care, but the busybodies who live in the houses right behind it, they started complaining, and they started making a fuss about it, and wanted the people who owned this vacant property to do something about it. And this, as far as I understand, this went on for quite a while, and eventually the property owners were pressured by the city, the police, and this particular group of people who were essentially complaining about noise. Although they also, from some of the newspaper articles that I read, they also liked to use the think of the children argument, because they said that there's like a walkway behind these homes that is used by the local kids, and they sometimes will cut through this parking lot. So the argument that these homeowners were using is that if think of the children, there's all of these people racing around in this parking lot, and a child is going to get hurt. But in reality, if you actually look at this parking lot, there's plenty of curbs in sort of the interior part of it that do provide a delineation between the walking area and the parking lot where people were doing this stuff. And really, I think that it was just a reason for these people to use to stop a behavior that they just don't like. Kind of the same type of person who likes to become on a strata board, or on a homeowners association type of board. These are people who I think maybe want to have a little more power in their life, and so they get elected to these boards, and they start trying to govern how people in their neighborhood can behave. And there's all kinds of horror stories about this type of thing and this type of person. But now they were successful, and there are now no trespassing signs, and these people have moved on to other areas because they're still going to be doing this type of behavior. They're just going to go do it somewhere else, and that somewhere else may be local streets in the middle of the night, or other businesses that actually do have property that may be damaged. But this particular place was out of the way, and it wasn't harming anybody. But they, this vocal group of homeowners said that, oh well, they're making a bunch of noise and they're loud, and I have to get up for work, and they were waking me up in the middle of the night, which may or may not have been the case. And if it was the case, one could say that, okay, there maybe was harm, because these people, their sleep was being disrupted, and that was affecting their life. But now people who don't have a lot of disposable income, they, particularly youngsters who want to get their energy out in a relatively harmless way, have nowhere to go, and they can't afford to go to a racetrack. So as a society, I think that it benefits everybody to have a system that works well, that works reasonably well for all of the particular groups of people who live in that society. And that includes youngsters who don't really have a lot of disposable income, who want to have fun with their vehicles. And one could even argue that it's actually, while it is fun, it's also beneficial, because it's also practice for when they get older. They become better drivers because they know how to operate their vehicle in more extreme conditions. So this is the parking lot that I was talking about. So this is the parking lot that I was talking about, and you can see it's completely abandoned, and they've actually removed the Rona logo, and you can see that is the housing development that's essentially right behind it. And there's a couple people who have the backyards like straight ahead there. They have their backyards essentially butting right up against the property. Now, I don't know where people were doing the street racing. My guess is that it was along probably this straightaway right here. But on the sign over there, it says, they put those barricades up, and it says no trespassing. And it actually specifically says no revving engines, no donuts, things like that. So it's very, and it says violators will be prosecuted. So it's very clear that. So it's very clear that you're not allowed to be there. But it's completely deserted, and this is how it is like all the time, that there's nothing here. There's a fire hydrant, but that may be shut off now, but it may be still active. So theoretically, if you hit the fire hydrant, you may cause damage to city property, or the water lines may burst. But there's nothing here, and it's really a question of the people who live in that housing development. are they affected or aren't they affected? And I don't know. I do see kids running around. There was a kid running around in the back of the parking lot not too long ago. So maybe they have a point that the think of the children argument may actually be applicable in this case. I'm really not sure. But I think that this was sort of a good deserted area for relatively low harm to other people, and essentially, sort of a social blow-off valve where if they come here, they're not really hurting anybody. But that's not the way that it turned out. I think there's a lot of nuance when it comes to this particular property, and I don't know really if the property owners, those homeowners, were justified in moving this forward. My thinking is that the property owner of this vacant parking lot, if they don't care, then it really should be up to them to decide whether they're going to enforce the lot or not. But an argument can be made that in either direction, that it benefits this particular society to either enforce or not enforce. You could argue it either way.